The wind carried salt and memory. Corvin stood at the edge of the old harbor, where the sea hummed against the rocks like a secret too long withheld. His beard had turned silver, his hands worn from a lifetime steering ships through tempests. Yet now, in the hush of dusk, he felt more lost than ever. The villagers had told him tales as a boy, that when a person dies with a wish unspoken, the sea takes it. It drifts beyond the horizon, to a hidden expanse where the tide remembers every word the heart was too afraid to say. He had once laughed at such stories. Now, he could not. He came back to the village because the silence had grown unbearable. There were words he had swallowed for years, to his late wife, to the son he'd never known, to the dreams he had buried beneath duty and distance. Each night he dreamed of a glowing ocean, whispering his name. On the shore, a young girl sold lanterns for sailors who'd lost their way. Corvin bought one, not for luck but for confession. He knelt beside the tide, lit the lantern, and whispered, "For all I never said." The lantern drifted out. The sea caught its glow and, for an instant, answered back with a soft pulse of golden light across the waves. The legend, it seemed, was not only story, it was invitation. The next morning, Corvin visited the lighthouse. It had long been abandoned, but rumors spoke of a woman who kept its flame alive, not for ships, but for wishes. He climbed the worn steps, the air thick with salt and rust. Inside, among broken lenses and shells, he found her, a tall woman draped in gray, her eyes pale as tide foam. She tended a small fire at the heart of the tower. "You've come to find the Sea of Unspoken Wishes," she said before he spoke. Corvin startled. "You know of it." "I guard its threshold," she said. "Many come seeking what they lost. Few return whole. The sea does not grant new wishes, it gives back the ones you abandoned." Corvin's voice trembled. "Then it can give me peace." The keeper shook her head slowly. "Peace is not found, old sailor. It's spoken, even when your voice shakes." She handed him a small conch shell, smooth and silver white. "When the sea is calm and the stars align above its mirror, whisper into this. Only then will the sea answer. But beware, it may not give what you expect." Corvin accepted the shell with trembling fingers. Outside, the tide had risen higher than before, glimmering like liquid glass. Somewhere beyond that horizon lay the sea that listened. He looked once more at the lighthouse keeper. "Then I will speak," he said. At last, the morning came wrapped in mist, soft, endless, and pale. Corvin stood beside his small sailboat, the Wanderlight, ready to set out once more. It had been years since he'd gripped the worn tiller of a ship. His hands remembered every rope, every knot, though his heart trembled as though it were his first voyage. He placed the silver conch at the helm, as the keeper had told him. "It will hear the sea before you do," she had said. The moment the shell touched the wood, the waves around his boat rippled outward in perfect rings, as though something beneath the surface acknowledged his intent. He sailed past the headlands, where cliffs rose like sleeping giants. Gulls trailed him, their cries fading with distance until all that remained was the rhythm of the tide and the sound of his breath. The mist thickened, swallowing the horizon, and the world became only gray and silver. Then, faintly, he began to hear them, voices. Not loud, not near, but like whispers carried from the edge of time. They murmured in fragments, forgotten names, unfinished prayers, laughter long since stilled. The sound filled the air like wind through broken glass. Corvin steered carefully, heart pounding. He had sailed through tempests and darkness before, but never through memory itself. Hours passed, or perhaps days, the mist made time meaningless. Once, he thought he saw lights drifting beneath the surface, not reflections, but lanterns floating deep below, as if the sea itself held its own stars. He whispered to them, "Are you the wishes?" The sea replied in silence, yet the air around him glowed a little brighter, like a nod from the unseen. At last, the mist began to thin. Ahead lay a line of light across the water, not the sun, but something stranger. A shimmer where sea met sky, as though the horizon were a door waiting to open. Corvin's heart lifted. He set his sails toward it. Behind him, the world of men grew faint and small. Before him, the Sea of Unspoken Wishes waited, a realm not marked on any map, where truth itself shimmered beneath the waves. As he crossed that glowing line, his compass spun wildly, and his lantern went out. But the sea began to sing. It was not a song of sorrow, but of remembering. Corvin closed his eyes and let the sound fill him. For the first time in years, he smiled. When the mist thinned at last, Corvin found himself among a chain of floating isles. Not land as he knew it, but massive coral formations that rose and fell with the tide. Their surfaces shimmered like glass, each one humming faintly with a note of its own. The air was alive with sound, soft murmurs, sighs, laughter, even fragments of lullabies. It was as though the ocean itself breathed through these isles, shaping every coral ridge into an echo of a forgotten voice. Corvin anchored his boat beside one of the smaller isles and climbed onto its slick surface. Beneath his boots, the coral was smooth as marble, and when he touched it, it resonated with a low, musical hum. He knelt and pressed his ear to the coral. A whisper rose from within, faint, familiar. "Do you remember me?" The voice was that of his wife, Mara. Gentle, trembling, filled with warmth. He gasped, nearly losing balance. The sound was not merely memory, it was alive. Tears blurred his eyes. "Mara," he whispered. The sea around him rippled, reflecting faint golden hues. The coral glowed softly under his palm. "You left so much unsaid," the voice continued, fading like a tide retreating. "But I heard you all the same." He bowed his head, breath shaking. All the guilt, the years of silence and regret, pressed on him like a wave. He had gone to sea for fortune, for pride, and had missed the last years of her life. Now her words drifted through coral and tide, still waiting to be answered. He whispered into the silver conch the lighthouse keeper had given him. "I loved you. I was afraid to speak it, afraid it would not be enough. Forgive me." The conch pulsed faintly, and the coral isle echoed his words back, not in his voice, but in hers, gentle and serene. "I always did." The sound traveled across the isles, each one repeating it in harmony, until the whole sea seemed to breathe her forgiveness. For the first time, Corvin did not feel unworthy of it. He looked across the glowing archipelago, each isle pulsing like a heartbeat, and realized this was not a place of sorrow, but of release. Every voice that had gone unheard found its song again here. He lingered until the stars began to pierce the dusk above, then returned to his boat, the silver conch now warm with light. The isles sang softly behind him, fading as he drifted onward. But her voice, her final echo, stayed in his heart like the steady rhythm of waves. Night fell gently upon the endless sea. Corvin's lantern swayed at the prow of the Wanderlight, its golden flame mirrored in the dark glass of the water below. The air was hushed, yet alive, as though the ocean itself waited to speak. The tide had grown still, unnaturally so. No breeze touched the sails, no current stirred beneath the keel. The silence pressed upon him until he could hear the faint beating of his own heart. Then came the sound, a slow pulse, deep and resonant, rising from below. It was not the voice of the sea as before, but something older, vast, and sorrowful. The water began to glow, lines of light weaving outward from beneath the boat, like veins of memory. In each pulse of luminescence, Corvin saw fragments flicker across the waves: a boy crying on a dock, a woman watching from a window, a young sailor walking away without turning back. He recognized them all. The tide was showing him his past, not as he remembered it, but as the sea had. Each image was a reflection of the words he'd never said, the apology unsent, the comfort withheld, the laughter forgotten. Every silence had weight, and now the tide carried them all, lifting them toward him like ghosts of light. He tried to turn away, but the silver conch at his belt began to hum. The voice of the lighthouse keeper echoed faintly within. "The sea does not punish. It remembers. Until you do too." Corvin's eyes filled with tears. He whispered into the conch, voice breaking. "I was a coward. I thought silence meant strength. But all it did was build walls." The tide shimmered in response, glowing brighter, and the voices of the echoes swelled like a choir. From the light rose a single figure, his own reflection, younger, proud, unyielding. "You built your silence," it said, and then called it destiny. He stared at it, at himself, and finally, quietly, answered. "I built it because I was afraid to lose what I loved. But silence lost it for me." The reflection smiled sadly, then dissolved into light. The glowing currents dimmed, the sea exhaled, and movement returned, gentle waves rocking the wanderlight once more. Corvin sat in the silence that followed, no longer burdened. For the first time, he felt the tide's rhythm not as judgment, but as understanding. The sea did not forget so that it could haunt, it remembered so that healing could begin. He leaned over the side, watching the last traces of light fade into the deep. "Thank you," he whispered, "to no one and to everything." The tide shimmered once more, a single golden wave cresting like a nod, and carried his words away. The following dawn was pale and endless, a sky of soft pearl that seemed to merge with the sea. Corvin had sailed all night, though he barely remembered steering. The rhythm of the waves had changed, no longer random, but steady, almost musical. He could feel it now, a faint vibration through the hull, a melody beneath the water. At first, it was only a hum, low and distant. But as the wanderlight drifted forward, the sound deepened, layered with harmonies no human voice could create. It was not made of words, but emotion, longing, forgiveness, courage, love. The Sea of Unspoken Wishes was singing. Corvin leaned over the edge, staring into the depths. The water glowed from within, ribbons of light swirling like slow fire. Each ribbon carried faint echoes, the whispers of countless hearts. He could hear laughter, tears, even lullabies, not his alone, but the world's. He remembered what the lighthouse keeper had said, "The sea listens to truth." Perhaps this song was truth itself, the collective voice of every wish never spoken aloud. Drawn by awe and a strange peace, he lowered the silver conch into the water. Immediately, the melody grew stronger, spiraling upward around the boat. And then, from somewhere deep, came a different sound. A single, human voice. Fragile, almost breaking. "Father." Corvin froze. The word was like lightning through still air. He gripped the edge of the boat, heart racing. "Who's there?" The sea shimmered, and beneath him, he saw a boy's reflection in the light. The face of his son, Aaron, grown now, yet unmistakable. The boy he had left behind. The voice echoed again, carried on the waves. "I used to watch the horizon, waiting for your sail." Corvin's breath caught. His son had spoken to the sea. Perhaps every night, every year he waited. And the sea, eternal keeper of silence, had remembered. He pressed the conch to his heart. "Aaron, I'm sorry. I thought I was giving you a better life. But I was only running from my own emptiness." The melody swelled, the sea answering in light. From its depths rose shapes of glowing fish, their scales like shards of moonlight. They circled his boat, forming patterns that pulsed with rhythm, like notes of a vast underwater song. The voice of his son softened. "Then come home." Tears spilled freely now, blending with the spray of the waves. The melody shifted once more, and for the first time, Corvin began to hum with it. His voice joined the sea's, rough, uncertain, but real. And in that fragile harmony, the old sailor finally spoke the truth not to others, but to himself. That no silence, however long, could drown love completely. The sea seemed to sigh, content. The glowing fish descended once more, fading into the deep. The melody quieted until only the sound of the tide remained, but its warmth lingered, pulsing softly through the wood of the ship, through his bones, through the world itself. Corvin looked to the horizon, where dawn painted the waves in pink and gold. He whispered, "Thank you for listening." The sea, now calm and glimmering, replied with a single gentle wave that rocked the boat like a cradle. The calm that followed the song was brief. By the second night, the sky darkened again, not with cloud, but with shadow, thick and shimmering, as though the sea itself had exhaled a storm from its depths. The horizon vanished. Lightning split the distance in veins of silver fire, and the wanderlight pitched against sudden waves that rose higher than any Corvin had known. He gripped the tiller, shouting into the wind, "Why now? I've spoken. I've remembered. What more do you want from me?" The sea's answer came as thunder, not rage, but grief. Beneath the roar of wind and water, he could hear faint voices again, countless and desperate, whispers of those who had never spoken, whose wishes still waited in silence. They filled the storm like a chorus of lost hearts. Corvin realized then that he was not alone in this sea. Every soul who had ever held back a truth had left part of themselves here, a fragment of longing that now surged as waves. Lightning struck close, splitting the water with dazzling light. For an instant, he saw faces in the foam, old and young, human and not, all shimmering like fragments of the same broken mirror. He understood. The Sea of Unspoken Wishes was not punishing him. It was asking him to speak not only for himself, but for all who never could. He pulled the silver conch from his coat and pressed it to his lips. Rain lashed his face, salt burned his eyes, but he raised his voice against the wind. For every word never said, for love unspoken, forgiveness withheld, hope abandoned, I speak now. Let silence end here. His voice cracked and faltered, yet the sea listened. The waves paused for a breath, as though stunned. Then, from the depths, a column of light erupted, vast and radiant, spiraling upward like a beacon through the storm. Within it shimmered the outlines of countless glowing shapes, souls released from silence. They rose with the rain, carried by the wind into the clouds, where lightning turned them to stars. The storm began to break. The wind softened, the thunder faded, and the rain fell gently now, not as fury, but as tears. The wanderlight drifted on calm waters once more, its sails glowing faintly in the afterlight. Corvin sank to his knees, soaked and trembling. The silver conch in his hand had turned transparent, its light now part of the sea itself. He looked upward. The storm clouds opened, revealing a wide field of stars reflected in the still ocean. Every ripple shone like a wish finally set free. He whispered, "You were never angry, were you? Just waiting to be heard." A single soft wave brushed the side of the boat, an answer gentle as breath. Corvin leaned back against the mast, exhaustion melting into peace. The storm had passed, but in its place, the world seemed reborn, washed clean by voices finally spoken. The calm that followed the song was brief. By the second night, the sky darkened again, not with cloud, but with shadow, thick and shimmering, as though the sea itself had exhaled a storm from its depths. The horizon vanished. Lightning split the distance in veins of silver fire, and the wanderlight pitched against sudden waves that rose higher than any Corvin had known. He gripped the tiller, shouting into the wind, "Why now? I've spoken. I've remembered. What more do you want from me?" The sea's answer came as thunder, not rage, but grief. Beneath the roar of wind and water, he could hear faint voices again, countless and desperate, whispers of those who had never spoken, whose wishes still waited in silence. They filled the storm like a chorus of lost hearts. Corvin realized then that he was not alone in this sea. Every soul who had ever held back a truth had left part of themselves here, a fragment of longing that now surged as waves. Lightning struck close, splitting the water with dazzling light. For an instant, he saw faces in the foam, old and young, human and not, all shimmering like fragments of the same broken mirror. He understood. The Sea of Unspoken Wishes was not punishing him. It was asking him to speak not only for himself, but for all who never could. He pulled the silver conch from his coat and pressed it to his lips. Rain lashed his face, salt burned his eyes, but he raised his voice against the wind. For every word never said, for love unspoken, forgiveness withheld, hope abandoned, I speak now. Let silence end here. His voice cracked and faltered, yet the sea listened. The waves paused for a breath, as though stunned. Then, from the depths, a column of light erupted, vast and radiant, spiraling upward like a beacon through the storm. Within it shimmered the outlines of countless glowing shapes, souls released from silence. They rose with the rain, carried by the wind into the clouds, where lightning turned them to stars. The storm began to break. The wind softened, the thunder faded, and the rain fell gently now, not as fury, but as tears. The wanderlight drifted on calm waters once more, its sails glowing faintly in the afterlight. Corvin sank to his knees, soaked and trembling. The silver conch in his hand had turned transparent, its light now part of the sea itself. He looked upward. The storm clouds opened, revealing a wide field of stars reflected in the still ocean. Every ripple shone like a wish finally set free. He whispered, "You were never angry, were you? Just waiting to be heard." A single soft wave brushed the side of the boat, an answer gentle as breath. Corvin leaned back against the mast, exhaustion melting into peace. The storm had passed, but in its place, the world seemed reborn, washed clean by voices finally spoken. Morning came gently, painting the world in gold. The sea, once endless and strange, now felt like a friend, vast, but no longer lonely. Elias steered the little boat toward the horizon, where the light shimmered like a path home. The oars dipped softly into the water, each stroke accompanied by the quiet hum of the waves that seemed to breathe in time with his heart. Behind him, the mirror of the deep faded into stillness, its glow sinking beneath the surface like a secret kept safe. Ahead, faint outlines began to form, distant cliffs, the green curve of land, and the soft sweep of mist curling like breath over the water. He was returning, though he did not yet know to what. The seabirds cried overhead, and their calls echoed as though the ocean itself remembered his name. For the first time in many years, Elias felt no ache when he thought of the world he had left behind. Instead, there was a calm awareness, a readiness to face what waited. As the sun climbed higher, Elias noticed something on the horizon, a figure standing on the rocks, waving. At first, he thought it a trick of the light, but as he drew nearer, the shape became clear. It was a woman, old now, her hair silver and her dress the color of tide foam. Her face was turned toward him with a quiet smile. Elias's heart trembled. He knew her. Even across the decades and distance, he knew her. "Mariel," he whispered. When his boat scraped the sand and he stepped ashore, the world seemed to exhale. Mariel stood waiting, the sunlight turning her tears to pearls. Neither spoke for a long time. The silence between them, once filled with what had gone unsaid, was now something gentle, a bridge rather than a wall. At last she said, softly, "You found it, the Sea of Unspoken Wishes." He nodded. "And it found me." She looked at him for a long while, then smiled faintly. "I once thought my wishes had drowned in that sea. But now I see, they were only sleeping, waiting for you to return." He reached for her hand, and she did not pull away. The years between them, the regrets, the things never spoken, all began to dissolve like foam upon the sand. They walked along the shoreline together. The waves brushed their feet, leaving trails of light that glimmered before fading back into the sea. Every sound, gull, tide, wind, carried an echo, faint and melodic, as if the sea were singing softly to them both. Mariel told him what had become of their village. How the harbor had fallen quiet after his departure, how some still whispered about the sailor who chased the horizon and never returned. And how, each year, she came to this shore to speak to the waves, hoping that somehow they would carry her voice to him. "They did," Elias said. "The sea remembered. Every word you left here, it became a star in the water. It guided me home." She smiled through her tears. Then we both spoke to the same silence. As they walked, they came to the old pier, now half broken, its timbers worn smooth by time. Elias placed a hand upon one of the posts and felt the pulse of memory there. He could almost hear the laughter of his youth, the call of the shipbuilders, the voices of those long gone. But the echoes no longer hurt. They were part of the song of things completed. He turned to Mariel. "There's something I need to say, something I never did." She waited, eyes kind. "I am sorry I left without saying goodbye. I thought I had to chase something far away to find meaning. But all the while, it was waiting for me here." Her hand brushed his cheek. "Then let this be your return, Elias. Not in regret, but in peace." They sat together on a stone near the water, watching the tide rise. The Sea of Unspoken Wishes shimmered beneath the daylight, softer now, as if its purpose was fulfilled. Elias listened, and in the hush between waves, he could hear faint echoes, hundreds of whispers blending into one harmonious sigh. It was not sorrow, it was release. The wishes of others, too, were being carried back, to those ready to receive them, to those who had once whispered to the deep and forgotten they had done so. The sea had listened, and now it gave back. Mariel turned to him. "What will you do now?" Elias smiled faintly. "I will build again. Perhaps not ships this time, but small boats, so others may cross their own seas." She nodded. "Then I will help you. I've learned to listen to the tides." They laughed softly, the sound mingling with the rhythm of the water. And as the day faded into amber light, Elias looked once more to the horizon. It no longer seemed a boundary, but a continuation, a promise that there would always be journeys, not to escape life, but to understand it more deeply. He whispered to the sea one final time. "Thank you for keeping my silence, and for teaching me how to speak again." That evening, as twilight brushed the water with rose and silver, Elias and Mariel lit a small lantern and set it adrift. The flame flickered gently, its reflection dancing across the waves until it became one more light among countless others. The sea carried it toward the horizon, toward all the unspoken wishes that had finally been heard. Elias watched until it vanished, then turned to Mariel with a quiet smile. "It's strange," he said. "The more we speak from the heart, the quieter the world becomes." "Perhaps," she replied, "that's because truth doesn't shout. It listens." Together they stood, the surf whispering around their feet, the sky opening above them. The sea of unspoken wishes lay behind them, but its song remained, not in the water now, but within them both. Dawn rose with a quiet grace, breathing soft colors into the sky. Elias stood on the old pier with Mariel beside him, the boards warm beneath their feet. The sea stretched before them like a great silver tapestry, its waves rising and falling in a calm, familiar rhythm. Today would be different. Not an ending, but the beginning of a gentler life. The village, once distant from his memory, had begun to stir with new warmth since his return. People had gathered around him, eager to hear tales of the Sea of Unspoken Wishes, yet Elias spoke not with grand gestures, but with humility, as one who had learned more from listening than from wandering. Some asked if the sea had granted him a wish. He always smiled and answered, "It taught me to hear my own." A new boat, a new beginning. The small boat he and Mariel began restoring sat in the shallow inlet, its wooden ribs gleaming with fresh varnish. Elias had shaped the hull with his seasoned hands, while Mariel had woven pale sea thread into the ropes, humming softly as she worked. When they finished, he carved a name onto its bow. The Listener. Children gathered at the water's edge, wide-eyed and curious. Some brought shells for luck, others small lanterns to hang on its mast. Elias thanked each one gently, kneeling to meet their eyes, offering simple stories about the way the sea remembered everything placed in its care. "Will it sail far?" one child asked. "Far enough," Elias replied. "But not away. This one is meant to bring people home." Mariel watched him with quiet pride. She no longer carried the old ache of waiting, instead, her presence was full of peace, sturdy as driftwood shaped by time. The sea's final gift. That evening, Elias walked alone to the shoreline one last time before launching the new boat. The tide curled around his ankles, warm despite the breeze. And then, he heard it. A soft hum rising from the water, delicate as a lullaby. At first he thought it was the echo song from the Isles, but no, this song came from everywhere, woven from countless whispers. The sea was returning its final messages. The unspoken wishes had found their voices. He listened as the water carried fragments to him. A mother's hope for her daughter's courage. A fisherman's regret. A child's dream of being seen. A broken-hearted girl's prayer for comfort. A widow's wish for one more dawn of love. All woven together, rising and falling with the tide, and then fading into harmony. Elias bowed his head. "Thank you," he whispered. It was all he needed to say. A soft glow shimmered across the horizon, faint, like fireflies beneath the waves. It was the sea's final acknowledgement, a gentle farewell. The launch. The village gathered as the sky deepened into twilight. Lanterns flickered along the shore, their lights dancing on the water's surface. The Listener bobbed softly, ready for its first gentle voyage. Mariel stepped beside Elias and took his hand. "Are you ready?" she asked. He smiled. "More than I've ever been ready for anything." Together they pushed the boat into the calm sea. The lanterns on its mast glowed, casting circles of warm gold across the water. The villagers cheered softly, as though afraid to disturb the sacred quiet. The Listener drifted outward, steady, sure, not toward escape or distance, but toward belonging. It found its place just beyond the breakers, where the horizon watched with patient light. Elias exhaled, the tension of decades leaving his shoulders. This was not the voyage of a man running from sorrow, but a man returning to life. A horizon that finally answered. As he stood watching the gentle drift of the little boat, the horizon seemed to bend closer, as though listening. The air shimmered, not with magic, but with profound peace. Beside him, Mariel whispered, "What do you hear now, Elias?" He thought for a long moment. Then he answered softly, "Not the silence of what I feared to say, but the quiet of everything I finally understand." The sea breathed out a long, steady sigh, matching his. In that moment, Elias realized the horizon had never been calling him away, it had always been asking him to return. Not to a place, but to himself. He turned to Mariel, and without hesitation, spoke the words he had once carried like a weight. "I'm home." She nodded, tears warm with joy. "And you are heard." Together they stood as the last lanterns faded into the night. The waves whispered around them, no longer echoes of longing, but a lullaby of peace. The Sea of Unspoken Wishes had one final lesson. When a heart finally speaks, the whole world listens. And on that quiet evening, beneath a horizon that no longer seemed far away, Elias felt his life beginning again, calm, hopeful, and filled with a gentle, enduring light. Wave Sparkle's moral lesson of the story. Speaking from the heart is the courage that heals all distances. When we dare to share our true feelings, even after years of silence, life listens, relationships mend, and new beginnings become possible. No wish stays lost forever when one chooses honesty, forgiveness, and peace. For more motivation fairy tale stories, please like, share and subscribe this channel. Thanks and God bless.